Go Math. We're finally into Unit 3, so this is Lesson 3.1. We have made it. This unit, I think, is probably pretty easy to digest because we're going to be talking a lot about integers, both positive and negative. An integer is any number and its opposite, especially when we're referring to, in this case, we're going to be referring to whole numbers. So whole numbers and their opposites, so these are integers, and opposites are numbers that when I add them together, they will cancel out and make 0. So, for example, the integer 2 and the opposite of 2. All right, so if we're talking about 2 and the opposite of 2, the integer 2 is on which side of 0? Well, I look at my number line and I see that the integer 2, let's do that in red. Go ahead and do that in red so everybody can see that. There's my integer 2, and it's on which side of 0? Well, here's 0, so obviously the answer being it is on the right side. Graph the opposite of 2. So, looking at 0, I am 2 numbers away from 0. So I need to go opposite 2 numbers, which would be 1, 2 at negative 2. The opposite 2 is at negative 2. And I ask myself, does negative 2 plus positive 2 make 0? Yes, it does. If I have $2 and I get hit with a bill for $2, I have $0. So the opposite of...
down here. Where are you? Come to the office.
Okay, so we are graphing the opposite of 2 at negative 2. Again, knowing that 2 plus negative 2 makes 0. So again, if I have $2 and I'm hit with a bill for negative $2, I have $0. So it's pretty easy understanding that a positive, the opposite of a positive is a negative, and the opposite of a negative is just the positive of that number. So the opposite of negative 2 degrees Celsius, or excuse me, the opposite of 2 degrees Celsius is negative 2 degrees Celsius. All right? So let's take a look at another one of these. And I would find 3 and the opposite of 3. Oops, excuse me, let me erase that. We're finding 3, graphing 3 on the number line. Use the number line to find negative 3. So we said before we have a positive, the opposite of a positive is a negative, and the opposite of a negative is positive. But what happens if I have a negative? Well, we think of this as an opposite, right? I know, it gets a little confusing. You have to follow all the opposites. But if I graph 3 on the number line, we're looking for the opposite of 3. Rarely is this actually going to be a piece that you're going to use in your everyday life when people come up and go, well, I'm going to need the opposite of $10. No, it's more along the lines of when you start seeing things like this, a negative integer, or a negative variable as we move forward into math. That's where this is going to come up. So graphing 3 on the number line, I know that all positive numbers are to the right of 0, and all negative numbers are to the left of 0. So if I'm at 3, and I want to find negative 3, I go here. And now I'm at negative 3, and I need to find a negative 3, or the opposite of 3. So I went to 3, and I found the opposite of 3, and then I need to come back and find the opposite of 3. So starting at 3, and then I make it a negative 3, and then I put a negative on that. 2 negatives sort of come together and make a positive. So this is one of the only times people always say, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Well, they kind of do in math sometimes. So again, if we're talking about the opposite of 3, it is 3. The opposite of 3 being negative 3. So then the opposite of that, or the opposite of 3, would be positive 3. And you just kind of have to follow this thought process through, okay? So always remembering with integers. So integers are any number, excuse me. In this case, whole numbers we're going to be focusing on, and their opposites. And opposites of numbers are numbers that add up together to make 0. And then we just want to follow in a number line that everything to the right of 0 is positive, and everything to the left of 0 is negative, so then we can look at a number line and start following the opposite or the opposite, and as far along as we want to go with this. So if we said the opposite of 3, so the opposite of 3. So I would start with 3, and I want to go to negative 3, so I'm at negative 3, and then I want the opposite of that, check, and then I want the opposite of that, and I'm back to negative 3. Again, this is not something people are going to come up to you and talk to, well, how much is this item? Well, it's the opposite of $15. It's not going to happen. But later, as we apply this knowledge of integers and their opposites, this will come in handy when we're dealing with things like a negative x, or something along those lines. So let's just focus right now on using our number line to figure out the opposite formulas.